Childe is one of the best units in the game in terms of both fun and combat ability. His kit is extraordinarily unique since he's a stance switcher while also being one of the best hydro enablers in the game. We'll take a closer look at Childe to determine whether or not he is worth your Primogems. I would like to clarify that this isn't specifically a guide for Childe, but I will be posting a very in-depth guide for Childe and another video for every single one of his team comps in the near future. There'll also be some gameplay footage in the background with his various teams, so you get an idea of how he plays and what his abilities look like. Childe is a stance switcher. He switches between a bow and dual hydro blades. His normal attacks are with a bow, but using his E ability will show his true power as a hydro enabler. Childe also has a mark mechanic called Riptide. Riptide is a bit complex and there's a lot of words to describe its various effects. Essentially though, at its core, all Riptide does is allow Childe to deal more damage and increase his hydro application to its peak. The main way you apply Riptide is with his E ability, through his auto attacks that crit, and that's thanks to one of his Ascension talents. Additionally, Tartaglia is a character that scales quadratically thanks to his Riptide functions. All that means for you is that you want to use Tartaglia in situations and floors against more enemies. More enemies equals more damage. Riptide has a lot of overlapping mechanics that can decimate several weaker enemies very quickly. Most notably is the on-death explosion effect that occurs when enemies marked with Riptide die. This can lead to a chain reaction of several enemies dying in an instant. This ability also has a growing cooldown. The longer you are in his melee stance, the longer the cooldown. Because of this, it's best to use Childe in his melee stance for roughly 7 to 8 seconds at a time before you swap out to your other teammates. Childe has two burst abilities. One burst ability for his range stance and another one for his melee stance. These two burst abilities share the same cooldown but have different energy costs. The TLDR is that for the most part, you want to use your range stance burst since it costs less energy and is more reliable to trigger elemental reactions. I would also like to add that both his ranged and melee stance burst deal a substantial amount of damage. You might start to be seeing a pattern here. Childe is effectively a very bursty character. He is not on the field for long, but when he is, he completely obliterates enemies and wreaks havoc on the field. But how free-to-play friendly is he? Sure, he might be powerful, but at what cost? To measure how free-to-play friendly he is, I'll be using two metrics: his weapon options and his first two constellations. I'll only be covering the first two constellations because C2 is usually the stopping point for most low spenders and free-to-play players. Any 5-star weapon with a crit stat will be good on him. This includes Skyward Harp, which some free-to-play players may have gotten from the standard banner, especially if you have played long enough like myself. For 4 stars, however, things get a little dicey. Viridescent Hunt is by far his best low spender option, and the passive actually synergizes quite well with his kit. Second to that would be the Black Cliff Bow, which is his best free-to-play option since he values crit so highly. Prototype Crescent and Rust are not bad, but they aren't great either. They'll perform, but they won't excel. It's suffice to say that Childe doesn't have that many great free-to-play 4-star options other than the Black Cliff, which you have to spend Star Glitter to get. It's not completely terrible, but his options are not amazing either. Moving on to constellations. His C1, while at face value looks pretty good, actually doesn't provide that much. Like I previously stated, you don't want Childe to be on the field for very long, so the cooldown of his ability won't be very long either. I would say that this constellation is not worth pulling for and is more of a minor quality of life. His C2 is also not that great. Childe, when built properly, doesn't have energy problems, and he isn't an energy-hungry character, making this constellation a bit useless. Overall, we can conclude that Childe is a fairly free-to-play friendly character. He has good enough 4-star weapon options, and his constellations are not worth pulling. Childe works perfectly fine at C0, and I can attest to that as I have a C0 Childe myself, and I've had him since release. What about his other costs though, aka resin? Primogems are important, but time is even more valuable. Let's take a look at his resin investment and how much time it takes for you to get him online. All of his talent level up and ascension materials can be found in Mondstadt and Liyue, so he's a pretty new player friendly character in that regard. His main artifact domain that has a set that was basically created for him is also found in Dragonspine. That makes him incredibly new player friendly, and newer players won't have to spend a lot of time to start trying him out. For resin cost, he's very dependent on crit rate and crit damage, so you'll need to invest a bit more time into him than other characters. The artifact domain not only has a set that was built for him, it also has another Cryo Freeze set. The Blizzard Strayer set is one of the strongest DPS artifact sets in the game. If you have someone like Ganyu, Ayaka, or even Kaya built up, then this is their go-to artifact set. It makes farming this domain extremely resin efficient in comparison to other domains. It also has its own artifact strongbox for you to use. There are not many other Hydra units that make use of this Heart of Depth set, so you won't need to farm multiple copies of it. It's kind of a one and done thing. But of course, artifacts are not the only thing that you need to sink your resin into. You will want to get your Childe's weapon up to level 90. His own character level doesn't need to be level 90. He doesn't gain as much value from going to 80 ascended to level 90 in comparison to other characters. This is mainly because he scales with attack and isn't triggering reactions as often as his fellow party members. His talents, though, might be a bit more expensive. You're going to want to level both his E and burst ability to maximize his damage. I would also say that crowning Tartaglia's burst is one of the best crowns you can use since it does so much damage. His normal attack talent doesn't need to be leveled up, but it's highly recommended you do so. This is because his aim shot can actually hit pretty hard, which is nice for when you mess up your rotation. It also increases the damage of his chain effect death explosion, as you see here. It's not quite as easy to get these juicy and satisfying chain deaths if your normal attack talent isn't high enough. From these facts, we can deduce that Tartaglia is a roughly mid-investment character. Now we'll take a look at how Primogem efficient his current banner is by judging the 4-star banner characters. It's important that I disclaim that the higher constellations you have of these 4-star characters, the less valuable the banner becomes. Like if you already have a C6 Heizo, then this banner is not as worth it. So first off is Thoma. Thoma is an interesting one because originally when he came out, he was very weak, but now he actually has a place in the meta with Burgeon. Funny enough, you can actually pair Thoma and Childe together to make a Burgeon team work. In my opinion, all of Thoma's constellations are pretty good, but C4 and C6 are especially good, and the ones you want to aim for. Next is Heizo. You can either play him as a driver like Sucrose, or as an Anemo hypercarry like Zhao. Honestly, I like Heizo. He is one of my best built characters, but I have to say it's more of a playstyle thing. Like, he's good enough, but he doesn't do anything better that other characters can't. Now, with that being said, I have had a couple of dreams lately, and let's just say that future content might make Heizo a bit more competitive in the current meta. He is a very fun character. All of his constellations are okay, the only standout are his C1 and C6. I have cleared the Abyss with him several times, but again, he is a character more for fun and playstyle rather than meta. Now for Lila, I have no clue. I have had some dreams about her. I have seen her abilities and the way she is supposed to function. To me, she looks like a very bland and just not a good character. I don't see what she provides to a team that Diona or Rosaria can't already do better. I mean, I guess her cryo application looks better, but I genuinely don't think she's going to be that great of a character in comparison to others. I'd be more than happy to be wrong though. Take everything I say about her with a grain of salt, since I haven't properly tested her. Overall, the 4 stars on this banner are pretty mid. I don't think they are so terrible that it should deter you from getting Childe if you want him. But at the same time, these aren't the greatest of characters for your account. From my testing, I have found that Tartaglia works in pretty much every reaction team comp available to Hydro. Obviously, I have to mention his synergy with Xiangling. They make one of the strongest combinations in the game. He also synergizes really well with Fischl and Beto, especially C6 Fischl since he is constantly allowing electro reactions to go off with his intense Hydro application. And lastly, I would like to mention Nihida. Nihida, like Fischl, works best with characters that have an insane amount of elemental application, like Childe. So if you have her, I recommend pairing her with Childe. Any sort of Dendro core reaction you want to do, just Pair up Nihida and Childe and it can probably work. To summarize, Childe is a very well designed character. He has a lot of potential, and learning to play him properly to maximize his potential is quite fun. He is one of the best Hydro enablers in the game. His Hydro damage and application is oppressive, and even more so when he's fighting hordes of enemies. He is fairly free to play friendly, and his investment isn't so bad. The 4-star characters on his current banner are also not so bad, meaning you'll get decent value every 10 pull. He works on a lot of different teams with several different reactions, making him a bit more flexible in the Abyss. I highly recommend that you pull for this character because he's a ton of fun and what kept me playing the game 2 years ago. Especially if you're a newer player who just got Xiangling or Havre already, he'll help you a bunch in the Abyss and Overworld. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please let me know in the comment section below. Consider subbing and liking for more content from me. But most importantly, remember to take care and have a glorious day.